All right, good morning, everyone. We are still looking at our triangles, and today we're going to be looking at how do we identify the parts that would match up for two separate congruent triangles. So when we talk about congruent triangles, these are specifically triangles that are the same size and shape. So these two triangles need to look identical. Now, each triangle has three angles, and it has three sides. And these are what I need to look for when I'm looking for their congruent pieces here. So all pairs of the corresponding parts of the two triangle. So if all pairs of the corresponding parts of two triangles are congruent, so if all pairs of sides, so one side in one triangle has a match in another, every angle in one triangle has a match in another. So if all pairs of the corresponding parts or two triangles are congruent, so if their pieces are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. And that's what we're going to be working with today, is finding all of our different parts. So let's start with our first example here. Now, a lot of this is going to come from looking at your pictures and finding the matching set of markings. So we talked about this whenever we name triangles and for congruence and name sides and name angles. So the first thing we're looking for are all of the corresponding congruent angles. So if I look in my first triangle, I notice that angle A has one curve in it. So I need to find find the angle in the other triangle that has the exact same markings, one curve. And that's down here at angle E. So that means angle A is congruent to angle E. All right, then we see if we can find another pair. Well, angle B has two curves, and it has to match up then with angle F because it also has two curves. So then angle B is congruent to angle F. All right, and then our last pair, angle C has three curves in it. So then it has to match up with G that also has three curves. So then angle C is congruent to angle G. So again, we're looking for markings. Now, the same can be said about congruent sides. We're looking for the matches. So find the matching set of markings. And in this case, we're looking at the dashes. From A to B, we have one dash, E to F, one dash. So those segments are congruent. So segment AB is congruent to segment EF. Now, when we're talking about specific triangles here, guys, this order is going to matter here. So when I labeled segment AB, I started at A that had one curve and went to B that had two. So when I go to the second triangle, I have to use the exact same pattern. You can choose how you want to start it, but you have to end it in the same way, meaning I have to start at E and go to F. Start at the angle point with one curve and then go to the one with two. Now we've got one with two curves here. I'm sorry, two dashes. So that is B to C. So segment BC is congruent to, we go to the other triangle, that's got to be F and G. So segment FG. Since B had two curves and it went to C that had three, same pattern for the other triangle. And then we look at our last one, which has three dashes each. So let's say this time I go from segment CA is congruent to, C had three curves down to A with one, so GE. Segment GE. All right, now we have enough to say, as long as I've got all my pairs of matching angles and sides, now I can say my two triangles are congruent. So if we start with our first triangle, and again, the order has to match up here. So triangle A, B, C. So whatever order I choose for the first one, I need matching order for the second. Is congruent to triangle. And the easiest way to go back and follow that is with your angles. A matched with E, so E needs to be first. B matched with F, so F is next. C with G, so G is last. Okay, the angles make it a little bit easier when you're writing out your congruent triangles. Now, what this is called that we have just written, this is called a congruence statement, and we're going to be using a lot of those throughout the rest of the year. And we'll talk more about what a congruent statement is here in just a second. Okay, that is called a congruence statement. All right, so we have a definition when we deal with congruent triangles. And it says two angles are congruent if and only if their corresponding parts are congruent, and that's what we just proved. And so we have an acronym that we use to represent that definition. And it is those 5 letters, C, P, C, T, C. And what does that all stand for? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So that's what it stands for, just the letters of that definition, the main leading letters there. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. C, P, C, T, and C. Now, more specifically, once we can make that and use that definition, that's when we can write your congruent statement. And like it says there, it is just a statement that shows how 2 figures, doesn't always have to be a triangle, are going to be congruent. And we're going to use that congruent statement here in a little bit to learn how we can find all your matching pieces. So let's take a look at some examples. All right, so in the following figure, QR is equal to 12. So let's get all of our numbers in here. Okay, and then it says R to S is equal to 23. Q to S, 24. So I know all the lengths of my different sides for one triangle. Now let's go and do the next triangle, our second one here. R to T is 12. T to V, 24. And R to V, 23. All right, so we know all the different side lengths here. So now we can use these side lengths to find our matching sets of sides. And then we can also use these to help match up and find your corresponding congruent angles. So let's see how that would work. All right, so let's start with angle Q. Angle Q, I'm going to give it one curve. It's between the 12 and 24 side. So when I go over to the second triangle, I need to find the angle that's between those same lengths, between 12 and 24, which means it's got to be congruent to angle T. And we keep working our way around. Let's say we go check out S now, which is down here. I'm going to give it 2 curves. That's where 24 and 23 connect. So that means it's got to match up with angle V. Because again, that's where 23 and 24 meet up on the other triangle. All right, now we're looking at our last one. Angle R, 3 curves. And guess what? It's got to match up with angle R in the other triangle. Angle R congruent to angle R. Now, take a look at this one for a second. There is no change from one side of that congruent triangle to the other. That's your reflexive property. That's where that property comes in, okay? That's your reflexive because your 2 sides stay exactly the same. Now we can use your corresponding, now we can use those same lengths that they gave us and find the congruent, corresponding congruent sides. All right, so let's start with QR. So segment QR that had a length of 12 is congruent to matching order. Q matched with T, so T's got to be first. TR. Then we do our second pair. Let's say we start with Q and S. Segment QS. Again, we started with Q, so I've got to start with T. And S matched with V. So it's got to be next. And then our last one, RS is congruent to, so R matches with itself, and S matched with V. So there's our congruence. Now we can use all of our congruent parts here to name our congruent triangles and make our congruent statement. So triangle QSR. Okay, again, I can choose whatever order I want for my first triangle, is congruent to, again, now the second one has to match the same order. Q matched with T, so T has to be first. S was next, so V has to be next, and R at the end. All right, now in our next example, we're going to use that congruent statement to find all the other pieces of information. All right, so if triangle WXZ is congruent to triangle STJ, use the congruent statement to name all the congruent angles and sides. All right, so let's start with that congruent statement. Now, one thing that will help you out when using the statement to name all these parts is to stack up those two names. And I'm going to zoom way in here. All right, so triangle W, X, and Z. I'm going to write the other one right underneath it. S, T, and J. So now I can find all of my matching letters. So let's start with the angles. All right, so if we're looking at angle W, it has to be congruent to angle S because they're in matching positions, the first letter with the first letter. Then I check out the next one. Angle X has to be congruent to angle T, second letter with second letter. And then I keep moving right along. My third one, angle Z is congruent to angle J, last letter with last letter. So again, you can really see how stacking them up helps matching them up a lot faster. All right, now we're going to use that exact same thing and do the sides. All right, so for our sides, first two letters, W and X. So segment WX is congruent to, and then I use the first two letters of the next one, of the one right underneath it, ST. And then we can do the same thing for our next set of segments. How about we do W and Z, first and last? Segment WZ is congruent to S and J, first and last. Segment S and J. All right, and then we'll do our last one. Segment, so I've done first and second, first and last. Now let's do second and third, our last two letters. X and Z is congruent to segment TJ. All right, so now guys, you've seen how you can use your congruent statements to make all your different matching pairs. Find all your congruent angles, find all your congruent sides. Now, you can always draw a picture and use that to help find all of your missing pieces as well. Just make yourself two triangles, W, X, and Z, S, T, and J, and then place your markings in there. So angle W with angle S, angle X with angle T, angle Z with J, and then have your dashes. So WX between the one curve and two curves, so it's got to match up on the same thing on the other triangle. WZ and SJ. And then our last one, 1, 2, 3 dashes with 3 dashes. So there's multiple ways that you can work these out. Either draw your picture or use your congruence statement and stack up your letters to find out which ones match. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about congruent triangles, and please reach out to me if you have any questions at all. Bye, guys.